18. Remembrance. Ichtak had read of the falls in myth and memoir, but what lay beyond them had always been left cloaked in mystery, just beyond the grasp of a reader given glimpses of Sholoshaidi's primal underworld. Even the treatises penned for consumption by the Tepekishko dynasty's eyes alone kept vague about what awaited a successful challenger in the dark beyond the pool. Ichtak felt his way forward blind through the rough tunnel, finding it pitch black, untouched by the candles which had guided him above. He was alone with Harakwe and his thoughts, and that left him boiling. Fortunately for him, he did not have to stew in the isolating darkness for long. When again the tunnels went wide and light found his eyes, it was a much smaller chamber he had entered into. Here, the lichen or fungus that had lit the prior chamber in its dull, sickly glow had grown thick through a forest of stalactites on the ceiling above, and a chorus of pale crickets chirped their song in harmony, scoring the space with reverberating white noise. Across from him on the smoothed floor of the cave, seated in the middle of a triskelion carved upon the ground, was Izel II of Sholoshaydi, dressed in simple black robes and flanked by two silent, consecrated Ektal of the Sholotlan Guard. She motioned for Ichtak to sit just before her and lowered her veil of office, allowing him to see her clearly through the gloom. Ichtak hesitated. With no record of how such a meeting was to be conducted, he was unsure of himself. Though a dethroned Tlatoani was doomed to die, and the challenge was decided by his very presence in the chamber, he did not know what that meant for him. If he was to strike his mother down, he had never been told to do so. "Sit, please," said Izel. It was an alien thing, to be given a request rather than an order. Ichtak did as she asked. "Did you spare a Koat?" Ichtak took a long moment to answer, trying to read his mother. "Yes." "I hoped you might," she said, nodding. "He is loyal to his faith and his ruler, even when he does not wish to be. He will serve you well." "What are you up to?" Ichtak asked the question as flatly as he could manage, and meant every word. He held the power here, the deferential Ektal standing guard having bowed in acknowledgement of his ascension as soon as he entered the chamber. Still, it was an entirely new experience to question the woman seated before him. The same fierce frost haunted her vision, with the same flawlessly channeled aggression simmering just beneath the surface. "You're no fool. Why a Koat? What game are you playing?" She took a long time to answer. "There's nothing magical or shocking to tell," Izel told him. "You've always been an adherent of tradition, when outside the bedchamber. I did what I needed to force your hand, and here we are." Ichtak's grip tightened around the hilts of forgiveness and Koat's makwahwit where they rested at his sides. His eye narrowed. "Break it down for me, then," Ichtak ordered, step by step. "You know it all, even if you've yet to piece it together and see the whole," Izel said. "The Duumvirate and its allies have been spoiling for a fight. They know that, if there is no war, Sholoshaydi will grow fat and strong behind her walls. Everything down to our birth rate scares the coalition. Ruhualpa knew this, and you knew this." Izel was almost gentle by the standards of her brisk, edged speech. "After Eztlan, your reputation became almost mythic," she explained. "To the man on the street, Ichtak VI was already the face of a Sholoshaishan legion. They might respect the silent Tlatoani, but they adored the conqueror, as it should be. The same time this began to dawn on me, I read the writing on the wall with regards to the Lautani. Much as I might want to wait them out, The sea witch who commands their navy is no passive kitten, and Harakwe demands blood." "I know of the Lautani," Ichtak told her. "Tell me of the Inquisitors, of the Ida. You laid your smokescreen well. Everyone in the public suspects industrial agents of the sabotage at the border. If they know of the ships in the Yakal Sea at all, they trust that they were foreign Lautani operatives, not the priests of Harakwe. But you had to have known some leak would let the real truth out." Ichtak shook his head as he spoke, the exhaustion and exasperation of the past desperate weeks steadily pressing down upon him. "I told myself there was no way a Coat's nomination was honest," Ichtak said. "I weaved all kinds of fiction to explain how you'd cheat the contest. I would not have been surprised if I were taken by assassins on the walk down into Xolotlan." A messy air cleaned up while he strode into an assumed victory. "Perhaps another dynasty entirely was what you thought Xoloshaiti needed to navigate the years to come, but none of that happened." She was calm still, and that disturbed Ichtak, placing him somewhere between anger and worry. He was still unwilling to believe. "I know you must be anxious to see the beginning of the big war," Ichtak told her. "It's the only reason you'd pin the boats in the gassings on the Lautani. But there are two things I cannot understand. Assuming it wasn't just a convenient scapegoat for the sabotage of the border forts, what did the industrial interests in Tepeklan actually have to do with the plot? And as for the Lautani, why not just acknowledge the threat and unleash the legions? Xoloshaiti has never balked at the notion of conquest for the sake of conquest." Silence reigned a long moment, their eyes both alive with the glimmer of candlelight and the light of the lichen. "I've never been a blunt instrument. You should know that by now," Ichtak's mother began. "I was always merely minding the throne for your eventual ascension. No woman can hold the title of Tlatoani until natural or martial death takes her, just as she cannot lead the armies in war. So, in implementing the will of Harakwe, I have always required a more subtle touch." Her voice was softer than ever he'd heard it. There was a faint maternal air to the explanations to follow which was entirely new. Perhaps in these waning hours of her life, Izel II was beginning to reclaim whatever persona she had carried prior to donning the Tlatoani's veil. "The Lautani question is simple," she explained. "We need an open war, for a victory through long peace would humiliate Harakwe. He demands blood for the insult of Lautani interference in his domain. Ruhualpa, and by extension you, always understood this. But the war to come will not be won in 4 or 5 years. I anticipate it will be generational, perhaps decades long, with each ragged power spent to exhaustion come the end. It will strain even our warrior kindred to the brink of collapse. In those dark moments over years to come, it is vital that the weaker peoples of this world believe our cause is just, that we are responding to a provocation on the part of the Duumvirate of Lautan. It is vital that, when the populace of one of their allied nations, whether distant Medvedstadt or looming Gunug, considers surrender, their meek citizenry understand that they are fighting a war their feline friends started. It will make them more prepared to capitulate, more eager to abandon the Duumvirate to the fate they will come to know awaits her. This is why I sent Xoloshaitian priests to the Ida lands under Lautani sails. We are given the offensive war Harakwe desires, but the world beyond this palace will see only a defensive strike against a slinking and subtle Lautani foe. The question of the industrialists is even simpler, she went on. As I have so often said, we needed them to keep a pace over the past 2 decades. They have none of the scruples and honor of a born soldier, and their thirst for decadence and plenty makes them cunning. The research they privately fund with the fruits of their factories and lending have given us advancements, to be sure, but it was the streamlining which proved so very useful. The foundries and forges of Tepeclan produce everything from engines to shoes at a rate unheard of a quarter-century ago. Now that they have done the work of birthing these industries, we will seize them. While they developed this efficiency for profit, we will use it to bury our enemies, to crush them beneath the weight of steel and lead. But there would, of course, be objections. After all, the magnates founded and shepherded these industries. Addicted to ease as they are, the nation's wealthiest men would not take kindly to their domestic goods being wholly subsumed by the manufacture of death abroad. They can fleece a commoner for every coin far more easily than the state, after all. One has an army to haggle with, and the other does not. This is why I have so carefully dressed the border fort sabotage in the clothing of business interests, so that those interests can be beheaded the moment gunfire begins, and their factory holdings subsumed for the legions. To the masses, who already distrust the Industrial Council and its supporters, the move will be more than justified, Izel explained. They will come back under the management of their regional nobility, either as draftees during the war or as labor in factories now managed by warriors rather than corpulent suits. They will regain all the protections they once had overnight, and in this way, Sholoshahidi will solve the problem of subversive magnates at the same time it answers the needs of its struggling Coatacuitli, all while losing none of the riches gained by their 20 years of innovation. Izel smiled, the expression seeming foreign to her. It was not warm, but it was also not false. There was distant, stilted pride in it. Ichtak, speechless, could only sit and absorb what she was telling him, feeling almost helpless again, despite the weapons in his grip and the victory he'd just achieved. You understand the reason I've done all this, even though your image of me can't let you place a finger on it. You write about it in letters with your courtesan, even if you've laced it with code. There is a duty that comes with holding as much power as I held, Ichtak, and you will inherit that duty. I did what was required of me with the time I was given upon the dais, and now you will do what is required of you, just as I did. Izel nodded to herself. She held Ichtak's gaze all the while, some unspoken comfort being shared there, as one ruler attempted to ease the passage of the next. I will not be remembered fondly by history, she said, but I filled a role for which I was not born after your father died in battle, ruled as best I could in the time that was given to me. I was a reformer, a peacetime leader, able to crunch all the numbers that needed to be crunched in the wake of our victory in the loud Sholoshahitian War. I did well, but I grew blind to the struggles of the masses, history will say, tempted by the influences of magnates, too soft on the Lautani abroad, and too clueless about the internal enemies at home. So they will write. But then the chronicles will note that her stalwart son, hero of Eztlan and Kushkotlan, saw what was afoot, that he stormed righteous into the capital, took to the dais of the Tlatoani before his scheduled ascension, and took up the sword of justice to avenge the wrongs done to his people under the mismanagement of his mother. Ichtak VI will inherit the wealth and production of Izel II, with none of the ties that bound her, and he will use it to conquer Haraklan. This is how it must be. The son takes the reins just as war flares to life, a warrior king to lead where a queen might not. Ichtak shook his head, cutting into the reflective pause. Many women have ruled Sholoshahidi during war, Ichtak protested. Have you no eye left? Are you blind? The old flames were back. She bristled, and for the briefest of seconds, Ichtak was a child before her again. The issue is not whether I could have ruled during the coming crisis, she explained.
The issue is not that I'm undecided on what could be done to keep the Empire afloat through the years of total war ahead. I could have done all these things. Moreover, you would have ascended within the year regardless. You are already 19, and your year in waiting is almost spent. We are all actors, and this is all theater, she said, regaining composure. It doesn't matter that I could helm the ship if given the chance. What matters is that I don't look the part at the wheel. I'm a peacetime industrialist, a woman forbade from the front, a civilian in all but name. If some great Sholoshaitan poet of old had penned a saga about the greatest war ever told, would Izel II be Tlatoani during the struggle? Ichtak did not have to answer that question, and Izel didn't drive the point any deeper. There was no point in twisting the blade. She could tell Ichtak understood. She could tell he knew where she was leading him. Don't waste the opportunity that's been handed to you, his mother told him. You are a perfect candidate for the throne, marked by the one-eyed god in his image, and given the same name as the founder of our line. Young as you are, all in your empire can only sing your praises. If you ask them to march, they will march, heedless of the pain they endure. She rose from her seat. Though the sight of thrashing Shatal on his way to the firing wall was too vivid in his mind for him to pity her, he could at least respect her tenacity. There was no trace of fear or regret, nor was there worry about the walk into death that was to follow. Izel II, the sole living person on the globe who had shared the throne to which he had ascended, leaned low with the bow. She did not kowtow, but it was as close a surrender as he would ever see from her. This is the place in history which has been laid out for you, by myself, by your father, and by Harakwe, Izel said. I go, at last, in pursuit of your father. Do not gamble your place in history by holding to your desires. The Tlatoani is the voice of Harakwe, but this only means something because Harakwe is the mighty lord of a strong, honorable people. You are merely the intermediary between the two. It is their needs that matter, not yours. There was no final goodbye. Ichtak rose as she had, head spinning with the enormity of the moment, realizing Izel II had said all she wished to say. She reached out, brushing his chin gently with a small palm, a reassuring hand, withdrawn only a second after it arrived. Their eyes lingered just a moment. Then she broke away. Izel II strode through a passageway marked by an aged silken shroud of ebony. Within, Ichtak could glimpse Tepeklan's place of preparation, much like the small, secluded hut he had visited in Kushkotlan's palace courtyard. Priests, prepared to embark upon the rites of Sholotlan within, welcomed their former Tlatoani to the stone slab. From his place in the next room, Ichtak could see that her beloved queently hounds, ever her shadow in life, were already among the dead, preserved with the same care she would be given at the foot of the ritual site. Then, the shroud was released, and the scene was obscured behind the curtain once more, Ichtak's mother passing from his sight, and the world of the living behind it. The prince had imagined what their final encounter would look like many times in the aftermath of Kushkotlan, uncomfortable as it made him. Ichtak had always pictured himself giving a righteous tirade, some recounting of the wrongs done to him at her hand and the failures of martial tradition under her reign, that he would tell her the rising new Tlatoani would assert authority over the old. In the flesh, it had been she that had done all these things. In the aftermath, he could hardly breathe, the full responsibility of both his ascension and his mother's self-sacrifice striking him mute as she went to her quiet end. Silent minutes passed, the muffled noises from behind the curtain growing gruesome as Izel II fearlessly found eternity by her own hand. But it was not long before another priestly attendant of the halls below entered the room. From the low-ceilinged, rough-hewn stairway to his right, a hooded figure bowed low and advanced, his arms wrapped around a small, squirming animal which craned its head to get a look at the newly risen Tlatoani before it. Quaintly pups were wide-eyed, their bat-like ears almost comically large in infancy, but this one seemed serene and observant rather than wild, its placid blue eyes and cautious wagging tail giving it a poised air. Its skin was a pale gray, boasting a rare pattern of dark spotting down its sides. Setting a Coat's blade upon the floor, Ichtak took the pup when she was gingerly offered over, clutching her to his chest. His first sign of station, this was to be the hound that would one day scent his path in death through the endless halls of the Underdeep. Chosen from her litter based on divinations known only to the deep-born brotherhood who bred the dogs in the darkness below, she was a more poignant token of office than any crown or jewel. Kehuili. It was a name, the title of this new companion. Barring another ascension to the throne in the near future, it was the final time the blind, aged priest before him would ever speak. The elderly holy man then produced a veil, fashioned to obscure the whole of his muzzle and sit like a broad scarf about his neck. With careful surety that seemed to contradict his milky eyes, the priest applied the veil to his Tlatoani, ensuring the Triskelion-patterned fabric over the mouth was perfectly positioned by sensation alone. He bowed once more, touching his snout to the floor in deference, and then retraced his steps down into the darkness of the tunnels below. Forgiveness in his right hand and Kehuili clutched to his side with the left, Ichtak began the long walk back up into the light of the surface, two unspeaking Ektal guardians flanking him all the while.